wasting away whilst society leaves you behind. Today, your will to continue this is going to be tested. I want to play a game. Before you is a video game from the year 2009. In order to escape, you must complete the same repetitive puzzle minigames over and over, the same way you've completed your videos over and over again. Each puzzle will be more monotonous and annoying than the last. Each hour of gameplay less satisfying and more soul-sucking. Will you complete this game to make yet another video on it? Or will you simply give up, returning to the mediocrity of regular existence? Live or die, Evan. Make your choice.
This video was not planned, but I got struck with the want to play this game because after introducing my girlfriend to the Saw films for the first time for Halloween month, I sort of got back into the franchise. The Saw films are my favorite horror movies by far, but I've literally never played either of the games before. And hey, since it takes place during the winter and we can see it snowing throughout the game, may as well write it off as a Christmas special. Today we're pulling the first Saw video game off the Retro Room shelf. Released in October 2009 and published by Konami of all brands, executives stated openly that they hope to make Saw their next big video game series and a spiritual successor to their previous horror hit, Silent Hill. This wasn't how the game was intended, however, as it originally began development by Brash Entertainment in 2005, who claimed they wanted to make the game follow up the first movie and allow the player to assume the role of multiple victims across the game, attempting to break free and overcome the traps laid for them. After this announcement, however, the game went dark for years until eventually showing up again at Comic-Con 2008 under the marketing tagline, "Dying to Play?" With this new reveal, Brash Entertainment said they'd handed development over to Zombie Studios, but would still act as publishers. They also claimed that both James Wan and Lee Wanell, the original writers and director of Saw, had come on board to help with the game's story. At this point, however, the development hell I'm seeing normally always suggests bad things despite their claims that development was on the up and up. Wouldn't you know it, just a few months later in November, Brash Entertainment announced that they were ceasing all operations, citing financial difficulties. Without Brash Entertainment to publish the game, Lionsgate was left holding the bag for a game with multiple years of completed development and no one to publish. Reportedly, there were discussions within Lionsgate regarding them just publishing the game themselves, but due to the lack of experience in their company regarding video games, as they were a movie studio, the idea was shot down. This is where Konami came into the picture. In February 2009, Konami agreed to handle publishing of the game in exchange for the rights to oversee the game's final development and the rights to future video games in the series as well. That is when they decided to try and mold it into their spiritual successor series to Silent Hill. Okay, so the rocky development is established, and this game's existence is honestly impressive considering what all went into getting it released. Unfortunately, that almost never means anything good for video games. Now, I'm a big fan of the movies, as mentioned earlier, having seen the first few several times, and I don't even really like horror movies. I'm not a horror guy or anything like I see a lot of. I just love the John Kramer character, and I'm so fascinated by the psychological aspects that it makes me love the movies. Well, most of them anyway. But I've never played the games until I decided to give this one a try, so I was going in almost completely blind outside of knowing a few minor things, which we'll get to later. So let's get into the game. Saw is a third-person adventure game with a heavy emphasis on puzzle solving. There are some combat mechanics, although they're not very good. I'll talk about that more later too. You'll spend nearly all of your time with this game making your way through the levels and solving puzzles to get access to the next room. First off, look at this menu. I really love how this was handled. The little icon in the bottom left, the design of the off-white tile room giving a sense of familiarity to the series. Everything about this is really great. They nailed the main menu. I wish I could say that about more things in this game though. Saw was developed on Unreal Engine 3, and it looks passable. There's sections of the game that I feel would have been fine due to the overall grungy aesthetic of the game's setting and locale, but then there's some sections that are just ugly. And it's not just because the game is old. This was released in 2009 and looks like a shiny game from 2005, which makes sense since it started development in 2005 and then just lingered and spun itself in circles for 2 or 3 more years. Now, I will give it that I'm emulating it with Xenia, so there's some lighting issues and a few other graphical quirks that make it look worse than it otherwise would be in my footage, but it doesn't look much better in footage from the PC version I've seen. The narrative apparently had help from series creators Lee Wanell and James Wan, though I really question just how much involvement they really had. Genuinely, and this is just a shot in the dark from me, I think they probably pitched the scenario of the game's plot, and that was it. Because early articles about the game's development suggest that the game was to feature multiple playable characters across a series of different traps whom the player would guide to survival or death. That is not at all the game we got, however. Instead, the game opens with Detective Tapp from the first film strapped to a chair with the iconic reverse bear trap on his head. I say Detective Tapp, but he's that character in name and concept only. Danny Glover did not reprise his role for this game, and the voice actor they got did not even make an attempt to sound like him. Taking over as Detective Tapp for this game is voice actor Earl Alexander, best known for his work as Lewis from the Left 4 Dead games. I will say he does a fine job in his performance here, but it is just not at all the same character from the movie. And it's not even the voice either. His lines don't even sound like things the character would say. And even worse, he looks nothing like Danny Glover. Like, at all. I understand they may have had issues with attaining a likeness or something, but this doesn't even remotely resemble Detective Tapp. It looks more like his younger brother or something. I mean, it's not even close. Which is just one reason why I think the series creators had next to no involvement on this game, despite them being credited and marketed as having worked on it. The setup here is that after Tapp was shot in the climax of the first film, Jigsaw nursed him somewhat back to health and then stuffed him into his trap. So in order to make Tapp atone for all the people he's hurt with his vicious obsession in finding Jigsaw, Tapp will have to overcome a series of different traps forcing him to face everyone he's hurt, most of whom have also hurt someone themselves as well. The first of these victims is Amanda Young. If you're a fan of the series, this whole sequence is not only hard to sit through, it's downright canon breaking. I don't think there's anyone defending these games as being canon, but they were sort of pitched to the market that way, as if they were going to fit snugly within the movie timeline. Well, if you've seen even the first 3 movies, I don't have to tell you why Amanda being put in this trap and saved by Tapp makes no sense. You might be thinking, well, maybe the developers didn't know how involved Amanda was going to be when they made the game. Well, included with Saw the video game is a trailer for Saw 6, which means not only had Saw 2 and 3 already been released, but so had 4 and 5 when this game was finished. And it gets even worse actually, because again, this character does not in any way resemble Amanda. They weren't able to get Shawnee Smith for the game either, which, okay, no big deal, because they got Jennifer Taylor to fill the spot, who we all know is an incredibly talented voice actress, most known for her role as Cortana in the Halo games. But she must have been given very little voice direction by the studio because her performance here isn't very good, and I hate saying that because I know how great of a voice actress she is, but I gotta call it like it is. Almost no one offers a believable performance in this game. It almost all sounds phoned in. But the thing is, I don't think it is being phoned in. I think the devs at Zombie Studios literally just didn't have any experience directing their voice cast and ended up squandering some very solid potential voice actors. There's one major exception, but I'll get to that.
We're all here because of you, detective. Oh, the hell with this.
The longer I played through this game, the more exhausted I became, continuously hoping for the game to just end already. By the first hour, you've encountered nearly every single mechanic in the game, and the following 5 hours are just a repetition of those exact same mechanics. Which works for some games, but in this game, the 10th time you've solved a circuit box puzzle, or even worse, the gear puzzle, you really start to get tired of it. Occasionally you might stumble upon a unique trap, but really almost every trap in the game is just one of the 3 minigames, sometimes with extra steps. There's a less common pipe minigame for instance, but it's equally as frustrating. All throughout this, we're watching as Detective Tapp faces down a multitude of different people who have somehow been impacted by his obsession with catching Jigsaw, including Melissa Singh, the wife of Tapp's partner who we saw get his head rearranged while chasing Jigsaw in the first film. Each time we encounter one of these characters, we have to solve an elaborate puzzle to free them, and I'm pretty sure most of them die shortly after. The seeds of an interesting story are definitely here, but they've been reaped by writers who didn't really have the chops to do the story justice. The gameplay is going to be comprised mostly of walking from room to room, avoiding traps like broken glass, which will damage your health due to Tapp not having shoes, or shotgun traps, which will be your primary cause of death. Every few rooms, you'll come across a Jigsaw puzzle symbol, giving you a heads up that you're about to face a timed trap, which you'll have to solve before you either explode or someone dies. And then lastly, there is some combat. Tapp has a light melee attack and a heavier one, or if you block an enemy strike in time, you can perform an instant kill counterattack combo. There are a lot of unique weapons scattered around to use, which is cool in concept. Fighting people off with broom handles or mannequin arms would be neat if your light attack wasn't literally the most OP attack in the game. Seriously, just spam Tapp's light attack right hook and you'll take down pretty much everyone with ease. Even if that wasn't the case though, this combat is terrible. I knew it was going to be bad going in due to some reviews I remember watching a few years back, like the one from G-Man Lives, but I'd hoped maybe he was hamming it up for the video. He wasn't. Fighting enemies actually feels like playing an unfinished pre-alpha build of what they were hoping the combat could look like. I can see how it sort of reflects Silent Hill titles like Origins or Downpour with its breakable weapons and clunky combat, but it's even worse than those. Spamming the light attack is satisfying in spite of the intended design, not because of it. It's pretty amusing to just punch dudes to death, but you can easily tell this wasn't what the devs had in mind. So the combat is really terrible, but it's really not the star of the show, and you won't be doing it much. So what about the real star of the show? The puzzles and the traps. Well, I mean, there are some really cool trap designs, but the best ones are just rehashes from the movies. The reverse bear trap, the shotgun collars, the pendulum. I mean, they're cool, but we've seen them before. Most of the new traps the game does introduce are really not that good. Amanda's antidote toxin mixer trap, for instance, is boring. The puzzles are, again, passable. Most of them aren't that bad, but for a game where you'll be spending most of your time solving puzzles based on an intellectual property known for its highly unique and intense traps, this is such a massive missing of the mark. And would you believe me if I told you that there's multiple endings to this game? In fact, if you die, you'll often see a little message at the bottom of the screen that reads, "Actions have consequences." This could lead you to believe the game itself is testing you, watching how you act, how quick you are to kill. There are various instances where Tapp kills people throughout the game via various methods, and I can think of at least 2 instances where I killed someone who I could have avoided. One of which I blew up by activating his trap when I could have left him alone. So you might be thinking all of this plays into your ending, like a Silent Hill game or something. You know, that game Konami said they wanted this one to act as a spiritual successor to? Well, it doesn't. The ending is split between 2 options represented by 2 doors at the end of the game. You just pick which one to walk through and that decides your ending. So the combat sucks, the story is a miss, and the puzzle solving is a mediocre letdown. Is there anything redeeming about the game? Well, yes, there are precisely 3 good things about the game. The first of which is the environment. The insane asylum where the game takes place is utterly oppressive. They really did manage to nail the atmosphere. The environment design is one of the only things that actually does feel like it came straight out of a Saw film. Not to mention a lot of the little notes we find from former patients across the building are genuinely horrifying. One of the little world-building notes you can find was written by a small child who was talking about how he was going to be put on an iron lung, and how he was having an orderly write his thoughts down so his diary wouldn't forget him. And that really made me feel more uncomfortable than any of the brutal traps or gore in the game. Like, I don't really feel super comfortable praising the game for accomplishing that through such means, but one of the most compelling aspects of the Saw films is how they make us look at so many things in life we all try to turn away from and pretend don't exist. So I guess they did achieve that through some of the notes scattered around the asylum. Several of them were like that too, so I'll give it to the devs. They really pulled it off with their environment design and atmosphere, which I'm considering is two parts of the same concept of world building. The second good thing about the game is the music. It's definitely not as good as the scores from the movies composed by Charlie Clouser, but it's super fitting for the game and definitely does justice to the Saw branding. It manages to capture that same melodic industrial feeling from the movies in a way that fits super well for the asylum you're in. The whole game score was handled by Alex Gilbert, and I really loved what he was able to put together. If most of this music appeared in a real Saw film, I probably wouldn't even notice the difference, it's that good. Honestly, I kind of feel like the score deserved a better game to go with it. It'll probably come as no surprise to hear that this game was not reviewed super favorably, but it was still appreciated more than you might expect. Most people tended to like the excitement of playing through the traps and exploring the haunting interiors of the asylum. Then of course, everyone unanimously praised one major thing about the game, and it's that third good thing I said the game got right.
Detective, your obsession with me has destroyed your own life and driven you here, like a rat escaping the heat of the sun. I think you know someone down here, your old friend from the force, Jennings Foster. You might want to ask him what really happened in that hit-and-run case you two worked on. That is, if he is alive, by the time you find him. Can you forgive one who has forsaken justice to protect himself? I suggest you hurry, Detective.
Remember earlier when I was criticizing the voice acting in this game, but I said there was one big exception to how bad it is? Well, if you haven't guessed it by now, Tobin Bell came on board to reprise his role as Jigsaw, and he absolutely nails it. The game is always at its very best when we see Billy the Puppet pop up on one of those CRT television screens and hear his distorted voice talking to us. So the thing about Tobin Bell is that he understands the character of Jigsaw to the point where I bet he didn't even need any voice direction to nail these lines. For those of you who aren't aware, Tobin Bell himself actually rewrote almost all of his lines from the second Saw film. In fact, a caveat for his involvement a lot of times is his approval of the script. There is a part of Jigsaw within Tobin Bell to the point where he was working with Donnie Wahlberg on the set of Saw 2 as they reworked a lot of lines to work better. In fact, in several scripts throughout the franchise, the screenwriters would just make a notation for Tobin Bell to insert his own dialogue in some parts because they knew his contributions were some of the most compelling parts of the films. Even in Saw 10, Tobin made various changes to Jigsaw's character before he would agree to come on board. So, I can't say I'm surprised how well he handled this aspect of the game. He didn't need any voice direction. He understood his character better than the people who hired him because most of Jigsaw's best lines were written by Tobin Bell to begin with. So yeah, at the very least, the titular character is handled very well, and every time he's on screen in any capacity is a total treat. Now we're to that part of the video where I answer the big question: is Saw worth playing for yourself? As much as it might pain me as a Saw fan to say, no, it's not worth playing. I'll be honest, this game really sucks. The story is bland and badly acted at the best of times, the gameplay is boring at best and broken at worst, and its visual offerings aren't very nice to look at. So I mean, like, what does that even leave? It might be worth watching a playthrough or just a compilation of Jigsaw's scenes because the music is great, and Tobin Bell's performance as John Kramer is literally better than anything else in the game. I mean, maybe if it was 3 hours shorter than it is, I could at least recommend it to hardcore fans of the series who could enjoy seeing the traps from the movies in the game, and maybe that would even justify the two different endings. But the reality is that the game is too damn long, and over half of it is just repeating the same 3 puzzles over and over again with minor exploration and bad combat in between. If the game was like a tight-knit 3-hour experience reducing the filler content between big traps, then maybe I could have justified a playthrough for fans of the series. As is, however, the game ran me roughly 6 hours long, nearly all of which sucked. There's a very good reason all of the movies are on the shorter side, because extended stays in these kinds of environments alone are exhausting as it is. Mix in monotony, repetitious gameplay, and a half-baked plot, then you've got a recipe for a waste of fucking time. So, I'm strongly suggesting we leave this one on the Retro Room shelf and spend our time finding better titles. Thanks for joining me on this one, guys. I'm always looking for good games to try out here on the Retro Room, so if you've got a suggestion of one you'd like to see me cover next year, drop a comment and let me know. As always, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, that's all I've got for you.
Game over.